Hello, my name is Dave Bowden, the news editor here at Ballotpedia. Election Day 2019 has now concluded, and although there were no federal elections that took place yesterday, there were state and local elections all across the country. Here at Ballotpedia, we've been up pretty much throughout the night providing coverage of race results for 2,983 seats within our coverage scope. And today, we'll be taking a look at some of those key results. Joining me today is Corey Eucalito, who is the managing editor here at Ballotpedia. Corey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
All right, let's just jump right in into the election results. And we'll kind of start by looking at the state government races, beginning with the gubernatorial elections, and then we'll shift over to look at some key local races. So there were two states that elected a governor yesterday, and that would be Kentucky and Mississippi. So let's start with Kentucky. Democratic State Attorney General Andy Beshear claimed victory over the Republican incumbent Matt Bevin and the Libertarian candidate John Hicks, although Bevin has yet to concede the race. What can you tell us about that election, Corey?
So, with all precincts reporting, Beshear received 49.2% of the vote to Bevin's 48.9%, though results are not yet certified. Libertarian candidate John Hicks received about 2% of the vote. So that leaves Bevin and Beshear separated by around 5,000 votes. And notably, Hicks received over 28,000 votes. Under Kentucky law, any gubernatorial candidate who receives more than 25% of the votes cast for a successful candidate, so in this case, Beshear being the successful candidate, may request a recount at their own expense. Bevin has not yet indicated if he will do so. Before Bevin's victory in 2015, Democrats held the governorship for 16 of the previous 20 years. Beshear's father, Steve Beshear, was elected governor in 2007 and won re-election in 2011. Bevin would have been the first Republican Kentucky governor to win re-election. Before a constitutional amendment in 1992, governors couldn't win re-election, so it was only going back to 1992. According to election night returns, Beshear won 23 counties and Bevin won 97. Beshear's 23 counties were the most by a Democratic gubernatorial candidate since his father, Steve Beshear, won in 2011. And notably, Beshear won 21 counties that President Donald Trump won in the 2016 presidential election. 17 counties this time around were won by a different party than they were in the 2015 gubernatorial election. 13 of those counties flipped from Bevin in 2015 to Beshear in 2019. The other 4 counties flipped from Jack Conway, the Democrat in 2015, to Bevin in 2019. Finally, Republicans controlled both state legislative chambers, neither of which was up for election this year. So if Beshear's win holds, he's going to break a Republican state government trifecta. Those two chambers are next up for election in 2020.
Yeah, and this gubernatorial race was really, really compelling to watch the returns come in, and obviously was talked about on all the news sources, and we were watching kind of like the county by county results as they came in. Now, Kentucky also elected some other statewide executives' offices yesterday as well, such as the Attorney General, Secretary of State, among others.
Right. We've heard a lot about how Donald Trump won Kentucky with over 60% of the vote in 2017, or in 2016. I'm sorry. And even though Bevin appears to have lost, Republicans did well in other state executive races. Republicans flipped both the Attorney General and Secretary of State offices. In the Attorney General race, Republican Daniel Cameron defeated Gregory Stumbo 58 to 42%. Cameron will be the first Republican Attorney General in the state since 1948. And Stumbo himself has already served as Attorney General from 2004 to 2008, who Cameron defeated. In the Secretary of State's race, Michael Adams won. That seat was previously held by, and is currently held by, Democrat Allison Lundergan Grimes. Adams and Cameron's victories, if paired with a final Beshear victory, will leave Kentucky under divided triplex control, which it has had since 2015.
Right. So triplex control or triplex control, we always argue as to how best to say it, is when one party controls the top three state executive offices. That would be governor, attorney general, and secretary of state. Now, did any other states see a change in triplex control?
Mississippi did. It went from divided control to Republican triplex. Um, Republicans retained the governor's seat and the Secretary of State office, and they flipped control of the Attorney General's office. Mississippi was most recently, a triplex in 2004 when Democrats held all three positions. Republicans, though, haven't had a triplex in Mississippi since 1876.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty. That's quite a long time. So let's talk a bit about Mississippi. So the Republican incumbent Phil Bryant was term limited, so this seat was open, and you had the Republican lieutenant governor, which was Tate Reeves, and he defeated the Democratic State Attorney General Jim Hood, as well as a Constitution Party candidate Bob Hickinbottom, and an independent David Singletary. Can you talk a little bit more about that result?
Yeah, Reeves won 52.2% to 46.5%. Like in Kentucky, education funding and Medicare expansion were key issues. And Reeves will be Mississippi's third consecutive Republican governor. Every seat in the state legislature was also up for election. And since Republicans held those chambers while Reeves won election, Mississippi's Republican trifecta will remain in place. One quirk of Mississippi elections that we didn't get to see play out is that in order to win a gubernatorial election, the state's constitution requires that candidate win over 50% of the statewide popular vote and carry a majority of the 122 state house districts. If that doesn't happen, the state house then selects the winner. The last time that happened was in 1999, and we didn't get to see it happen and play out this year.
All right. So two very compelling elections happening at the state level, and some interesting results from that. Let's transition over to talking about the state legislatures that were up for election yesterday. There were three states that held regular state legislative elections yesterday. And let's take a look at their results. So in New Jersey, only one of the two chambers was up for election. That was the General Assembly, the State House, and Democrats maintained their majority there. And you already mentioned that in Mississippi, Republicans held their control of both the State House and the State Senate. So this year's battleground state legislative races were in Virginia, where all 100 seats in the House of Delegates and 40 seats in the State Senate were up. And Democrats have flipped control of both of those chambers. Corey, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Democrats will have trifecta control of Virginia for the first time since 1993. The governorship, which is currently held by Democrat Ralph Northam, was not up for election this year. So let's start by talking about the state Senate. That chamber was last up for election in 2015. Heading into the election, Republicans held a 21-19 majority. Two districts flipped from Republican to Democratic control. So Democrats now have a 21-19 majority in the state Senate. Both of those districts that flipped had been won by Northam in 2017 and by Hillary Clinton in the presidential election in 2016. And interestingly, those two districts, districts 10 and 13, featured the highest levels of candidate fundraising of all of the state Senate elections in this year's cycle.
So what we still have is a narrow majority, but this time the Democrats are the ones with that narrow majority rather than the Republicans. What about the House of Delegates?
Yeah, so the House of Delegates was last up for election in 2017, but between then and now, a court ordered the creation of new district maps. So under the new maps in play this year, there were 11 Republican-held seats that Ralph Northam had won in his 2017 gubernatorial victory, and there were no Democratic-held seats where 2017 Republican gubernatorial candidate Ed Gillespie won. So this year, Democrats flipped 6 Republican-held seats to win a 54-45 majority, with one race still too close to call. All 6 of the seats that Democrats picked up were won by Ralph Northam and by were all won by Ralph Northam in 2017, and Hillary Clinton won all but one of the seats in the 2016 presidential election. In flipping those 6 seats, Democrats defeated 4 Republican incumbents and won 2 open seats that were previously held by Republicans. Perhaps most interesting or importantly, these Virginia elections determined control of Virginia's government heading into congressional and state legislative redistricting after the 2020 census. In Virginia, congressional and state legislative district maps are set by the state legislature and are subject to veto by the governor. So with control of the state Senate, the House of Delegates, and the gubernatorial seat, Democrats will have total control of the redistricting process after the 2020 census.
Exactly. And this is a very tangible case of where, elections have a direct impact on policy. So, it's they follow one from the other. All right. So we've covered a lot of very interesting stuff at the state level. Now let's pivot to municipal elections. I know Ballotpedia covered more than 2,000 seats in local races that were on the ballot yesterday, and there's no way we can even scratch the surface. So we're just going to focus on a few. And let's start with Houston, where the incumbent mayor, Sylvester Turner, advanced to a runoff against Tony Busby. What was at stake in this race?
So this was a nonpartisan race with 12 candidates on the ballot, including Mayor Turner. And a candidate needed to win a majority of the vote to avoid a December 14th runoff. In the end, though, Turner received 46.9% to Tony Busby's 28.4%. Houston has a strong mayor system. So what's at stake is that the mayor here serves as a chief executive and has authority over budgetary and administrative issues, as well as the city's day-to-day operations. And Houston is the 4th largest city in the country, so it's a strong position. Tony Busby finished ahead of 2015 second-place finisher Bill King, who placed 3rd this year. And if we go back to 2015, we might anticipate an interesting runoff. Sylvester Turner won the 2015 runoff election against Bill King by less than 700 votes, 50.2% to 49.8%, a margin of 0.4 percentage points. So if history is any indication, this could be an interesting runoff election.
Yeah, it could be a very, very, very close runoff indeed. And that wasn't the only election in Houston yesterday, correct?
Correct. There were some city council seats up, but most notably, 4 of the 9 seats on the city's school board were up for election. Heading into the election, the Houston Independent School District Board. Heading into the election, the school board faces the possibility of being replaced by a state-appointed board of managers for one of either 2 reasons, either the result of a state investigation into the board's governance or as a result of poor academic performance ratings at a high school in the district. 2 of those 2 incumbents were defeated in those 4 races, and the 2 seats that were open are proceeding to a December 14th runoff. So there's a very interesting backdrop against which those school district elections took place yesterday.
And there's also a very interesting dynamic with Houston elections in that yesterday's races obviously took place on a Tuesday, but the runoffs in Texas are on Saturday. So December 14th is actually a Saturday. So it will be very, very interesting to see how that all plays out. All right, switching from the country's 4th largest city to another very large city, which is Philadelphia. And the Democratic mayor there, Jim Kenney, was reelected, but there was a lot of national attention on the at-large race for city council seats. Now, all 17 city council seats were up for election. 10 of those are selected from each of 10 districts, but the remaining 7 are elected by the city as a whole at large. What happened in those races?
So for the first time in Philadelphia's history, or at least since the city adopted its current charter in 1951, voters picked a candidate to serve on a city council at-large seat who wasn't associated with one of the either 2 major parties. As you said, 7 of the city council seats are elected by the city as a whole. Each party, though, can only nominate 5 candidates for those at-large seats. So it isn't possible for one party to control every city council seat. So going back to 1951, the 7 at-large council seats have always been held by 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans. This year, though, Working Families Party candidate Kendra Brooks won one of the 2 seats that typically go to Republicans. While the Working Families Party did run a second candidate with the goal of taking both council seats, that candidate fell short of Republican incumbent David O., who won re-election to one of those 7 at-large seats.
Wow, that definitely sounds pretty remarkable. What is the then overall partisan balance on Philadelphia City Council now?
None of the 10 district seats changed control. Democrats still hold 9, Republicans hold the 10th. So overall, Democrats hold 14 seats, Republicans 2, and the Working Families Party holds 1.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right, now let's go all the way across the country to San Francisco, and there again, the mayor was reelected. London Breed was the mayor. But also, as in Philadelphia, there was quite a bit of national attention on a race that's further down on the ballot. And in this case, it was the election for city district attorney. What can you tell us about that race?
Yeah, so the district attorney is San Francisco's top prosecutor and is quite influential in determining the city's approach to law enforcement. The incumbent didn't run for re-election, setting up the first open seat race since 1909. At the moment, the race is too close to call. Of the 4 candidates, the 2 top contenders are public defender Chesa Bowden and interim district attorney Susie Loftus. Bowden is running with endorsements from Bernie Sanders and the San Francisco Green Party, while Loftus was endorsed by Kamala Harris and the San Francisco Democratic Party. Kamala Harris, notably, was San Francisco's district attorney herself before being elected California Attorney General. Like all San Francisco elections, this race uses ranked choice voting. This means that voters select multiple candidates and rank their preferences among those candidates. If no candidate wins a majority of votes, the last place candidate is eliminated, and all of their ballots go to the voter's next preferred candidate. This process is repeated until one candidate wins a majority. So that's one of the notable reasons why this race remains too close to call. We need to see where those lower preference ballots, which candidate ends up receiving those in the end.
Yeah, the mechanics of the applying the ranked choice voting can get really complicated. I know that from some of the other municipal races that we've covered. And New York City voted yesterday to adopt a similar system for certain elections that are going forward. But we'll get to that in a minute. Do we have any idea of how San Francisco's ranked choice results might work out?
Well, preliminary results from the Department of Elections show that no candidate has a majority of the first place vote, but Bowden leads with by 2.1%. And this is the candidate that was endorsed by Sanders and the San Francisco Green Party. The department released a projection of what would happen if they ran through the ranked choice system with just the ballots that have already been counted. And that showed Susie Loftus leading by 0.26 percentage points, or just 240 votes. But California is a vote by mail state, so there are still more ballots coming in. And the San Francisco Chronicle has said that it might take several days for a winner to be decided.
So we now have a kind of a combination between 2 election systems that we didn't have even pretty recently, and that is all mail voting and also ranked choice voting. So it's interesting to see how the election processes evolve. Very, very interesting. All right, one last race on the local level is that 7 of the 9 seats on Seattle City Council were also up for election. And those are generally officially nonpartisan races. But last year, Seattle's City Council proposed and then rejected a measure which would have imposed a per employee tax on companies that grossed over $20 million. So the City Chamber of Commerce, which includes Amazon, opposed that proposal, and its Political Action Committee case endorsed candidates in each of those 7 city council races. and a rival committee known as the Civic Alliance for a Progressive Economy, CAPE, endorsed in 5 of those 7 races. Now, all of that gets to the point that based on the most recent campaign finance reports, these outside groups spent $4.3 million on these races compared to just under $800,000 the last time these seats were up. So what do we know about the breakdown of results for these races?
Again, we can't say for certain what these results will look like. Washington is an exclusively vote-by-mail state, and ballots are still being counted. King County will release official certified results by November 26th. But based on unofficial results that we have now, case-endorsed candidates, those are the candidates supported by the Chamber of Commerce, won 4 of the 7 council seats. Again, this is early, though. Each of the other 3 apparent winners were backed by CAPE, that is the Civic Alliance for a Progressive Economy. 3 incumbents ran for re-election. 1 was backed by CASE, the chamber group, and 2 by CAPE. One of the 2 CAPE-backed incumbents appears headed to defeat, while the other 2 incumbents seem poised to win re-election. The other 2 seats on the Seattle City Council are elected by the city as a whole and won't be up for election until 2021, along with the mayor.
All right, so even though this was not a federal election year, we had a lot of really, really fascinating elections and storylines going on in 2019. It's all great stuff. Now, I just want to look ahead to another briefing that Ballotpedia is doing tomorrow about ballot measures that were decided yesterday. And there were some really, really interesting results around the country. So let's just touch on a few as sort of kind of like an appetizer for that briefing tomorrow. The first one is, and you touched on it just a few minutes ago, is that New York City approved a ranked choice voting measure yesterday, right?
Yeah, that's right. That was one of a lot of noteworthy measures. This was New York City Question 1, in which voters formally approved the use of ranked choice voting in special elections and primaries. And that makes New York City the largest jurisdiction in the country to use ranked choice voting.
And all of the folks that I follow on social media who are animal lovers were talking about a particular measure in Texas.
Yes, Proposition 10. It was one of 10 constitutional amendments decided yesterday in Texas. And it allows for the transfer of a law enforcement animal, like a dog or a horse, to the animal's handler or another qualified caretaker if the transfer is in the animal's best interest. Before this amendment, a retiring police dog or working animal could only be donated to a civic or charitable organization or auctioned. This measure was approved by an historically high margin, 94% to 6%. The last measure I want to mention is Colorado Proposition CC. This measure was rejected, but it would have amended Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights to allow the state to keep excess tax revenue and save it for education and transportation. That's just a very brief explanation, but our briefing tomorrow will explain it in much more detail. But again, these are just a few of the noteworthy ballot measure results from last night, and we'll have much more on that in our next briefing tomorrow.
Yes, fantastic. And as we said, this is just a sample of what you'll learn during tomorrow's briefing with Josh Altick, who is our ballot measures expert. That webinar is also at 1:30 p.m. Central Time, and there's still, I think, a handful of spots available. So if you're interested, I would register for that right after we're done here. So we crammed lots of info into this webinar to catch you up on all of the most prominent election results that have happened in 2019. And the election season for 2019 is still not done. There's the runoff elections for Louisiana, including the governor's race, are just 10 days away, and that's November 16th. And we mentioned earlier about the runoffs in Houston taking place on Saturday, December 14th. But before we end things, Corey, Election Day 2020 is not that far away. It's less than a year away. What can we expect to see on the ballot next year, in addition to the presidential race?
2020 is going to be even busier than 2019, as well as the presidency. 35 of the 100 seats in the U.S. Senate and all 435 U.S. House seats will be up for election. On the state level, every state other than New Jersey and Virginia is electing at least one office. There will be 159 state executive offices, including 11 governorships on the ballot. In state legislative elections, there will be 5,875 seats up for regular election across 44 states. That's 80% of all the state legislative seats in the country. There are also 277 state appellate judges up for election in 36 states. Before we wrap up, Dave, too, I want to acknowledge one question that we just got about whether it is scientifically possible in a ranked choice voting system that the least favored candidate could end up winning. I think it's a really great question, and I do not know the answer to it. So I was just encouraged if Dave, do you have any idea the answer to that?
I don't. I know it's very, very complicated. I don't know that it's possible, but I don't know the answer. I would just be guessing.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, so I just wanted to acknowledge it. And if we can come up with an answer, we might be able to get in touch via email after this.
Yes, if you send an email to editor@ballotpedia.org, we'll try to research it and get you an answer. That is a great question. All right, so it looks like we are in for another exciting 12 months of election coverage. Hopefully we'll have a few days to get a little bit of sleep before we get started on that. But thank you very much for joining us, Corey.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, so for more information on the election results from 2019 and upcoming races in 2020, be sure to check out the comprehensive coverage that is available on our website, ballotpedia.org. And we also invite you to keep in the know with all of our email newsletters, including the Daily Brew, which comes out every weekday, and our weekly newsletter, The Tap. So thank you all for joining us, everyone.